Russia. The name itself sounds powerful, doesn't it? It echoes through history, conjuring images of tsars, empires, and vast landscapes. But where did this famous name actually come from? The story is way more surprising than you might think. It didn't start with an empire, but with a scattered group of settlements along rivers, known as the Rus. And the people who gave them that name? Vikings! That's right, Scandinavian warriors and traders who sailed down the rivers of Eastern Europe. Over centuries, through the influence of religion, shifting politics, and a thirst for power, this collection of settlements evolved. The name Rus transformed into Russia, forging one of the most influential nations the world has ever known. To really understand Russia, you have to start right here with the fascinating origin of its name. Stick around to learn more. Ever wonder how Russia got its name? The story might surprise you. It doesn't start in Moscow or with the Tsars, it starts with Vikings. But these weren't your typical raiders from the West. These were Scandinavian warriors and traders who looked east and south. They were known as the Varangians. Back in the 9th century, these adventurous Norsemen packed their longships and set off, not across the stormy North Sea, but down the winding rivers of Eastern Europe. Imagine these rivers, the Volga, the Dnieper, the Don, as the superhighways of the medieval world. The Varangians used them to connect the cold Baltic Sea all the way down to the rich, warm lands of the Byzantine Empire and the Arab caliphates. They were masters of trade, carrying furs, honey, wax, and slaves south, and bringing back silver, silks, and spices from Constantinople and Baghdad. They established bustling trade posts along these river routes, which grew into major cities. But the Varangians were more than just merchants. They were also formidable mercenaries, known for their loyalty and fighting skill. The Byzantine emperor himself hired them to be his personal bodyguards, the legendary Varangian Guard. Here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. According to ancient chronicles, the local Slavic and Finnic tribes living in the region were constantly fighting amongst themselves. Fed up with the chaos, they supposedly did something incredible. They invited the Varangians to come and rule over them. They said, "Our land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Come to rule and reign over us." So a Varangian chieftain named Rurik accepted the invitation around the year 862. He and his brothers established their rule in the city of Novgorod. Rurik and his people became known as the Rus. Over time, this name, the Rus, came to be applied not just to the Viking rulers, but to the entire land and all its people. Rurik's successor, Oleg, moved the capital south to a more strategic city on the Dnieper River, Kyiv. This established the foundation of a powerful state known as Kievan Rus. For centuries, this Viking Slavic state flourished, a dynamic fusion of Norse and Slavic cultures. The Varangian elite eventually assimilated, adopting Slavic language and customs, but their legacy was permanent. They had laid the foundation for the future nations of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. So the next time you think of Vikings, remember the Varangians. They were not just raiders, but explorers, traders, mercenaries, and kings who sailed down rivers and ended up giving a vast country its name. It's a powerful reminder of how interconnected our world has always been. You've probably heard of the Kievan Rus, that medieval state that was the ancestor to modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. But have you ever wondered how the name Rus evolved into Rossía or Russia? The story is fascinating, and it's all about religion, prestige, and a bit of a linguistic makeover. Let's rewind to the year 988 AD. This was a pivotal moment. Prince Vladimir the Great of Kyiv made a monumental decision. He converted to Orthodox Christianity and had his people baptized. This single act didn't just change their faith. It fundamentally reoriented their entire world. By adopting the religion of the Byzantine Empire, the Kievan Rus was pulled into its powerful cultural and political orbit. Think of it as joining the most prestigious club of its time. Now, this is where the name change comes in. The Byzantines, who spoke Greek, had their own way of referring to foreign lands and peoples. They were masters of a sophisticated classical naming system that added a layer of grandeur to everything. When they looked at the newly Christianized land of the Rus, they didn't just translate the name. Instead, they elevated it. Following their own naming conventions, they took the root Rus and added their classic suffix ia, a common ending for country names in Greek. Think Gallia for Gaul or Persia. So Rus became Rossía. This wasn't just a simple transliteration. It was a rebranding. The name Rossía carried the weight and prestige of the Greek-speaking Byzantine world. It signaled that Rus was no longer just some distant northern land, but a recognized member of the Orthodox Christian Commonwealth, a part of the civilized world as the Byzantines saw it. This Greek form, rossiya, was then adopted back by the Rus themselves, especially by the church and the educated elite, who were deeply influenced by Byzantine culture. Over the centuries, as the center of power shifted from Kyiv to Moscow, this Hellenized name stuck. It evolved into the modern Russia, a name that carries echoes of its medieval baptism and its grand entry onto the world stage through the golden gates of Byzantium. So the next time you hear the name Russia, remember it's not just a name, it's a legacy. A 1,000-year-old story of faith, power, and a little bit of Greek flair. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical deep dives. Ever wonder why we call it Russia? It's a name that sounds ancient, like it's been around forever. But what if I told you the story is a lot more complicated and it's all about power? Let's rewind the clock. For centuries, the center of the East Slavic world wasn't Moscow, but a powerful, vibrant city called Kiev. This civilization was known as Kievan Rus. It was a major player on the European stage, a hub of trade, culture, and Orthodox Christianity. But nothing lasts forever. In the 13th century, the Mongol invasion swept through, leaving a trail of destruction. Kiev, once the glorious capital, was sacked and left in ruins, its power shattered. In the aftermath of this collapse, a new power began to rise from the ashes, far to the northeast. This was the Grand Duchy of Moscow. Initially just a minor principality, Moscow's rulers were ambitious, clever, and ruthless. They played a strategic game, sometimes cooperating with the Mongol Khans, other times rebelling, but always expanding their territory and influence. As they grew stronger, they needed something to legitimize their newfound dominance. They needed a story, an identity that connected them to the glorious past of Kievan Rus. They began to position themselves not just as a new power, but as the rightful heirs, the sole successors to the legacy of Rus. By the 1500s, under rulers like Ivan the Great and Ivan the Terrible, this claim was formalized. They looked back to the Greek name for Rus, Rossía, and officially adopted it. This wasn't just a name change. It was a powerful political statement. By calling themselves Rossía or Russia, they were essentially saying, "We are the true Rus." The spirit of Kiev now lives here, in Moscow. It was a masterstroke of branding, a way to declare to the world that they were the new center of the Slavic Orthodox world. So the name Russia wasn't born out of a simple historical evolution. It was chosen deliberately and strategically as a symbol of ambition and a claim to a grand imperial destiny. History isn't just what happened. It's also about who gets to tell the story. Ever wondered how Russia got its name? It's a story of power, ambition, and a fallen empire. It all starts with Kievan Rus, a powerful medieval state. But when Kiev fell in the 13th century, a power vacuum emerged. Who would inherit its legacy? Several principalities vied for the title, but one, in particular, rose from the ashes: Moscow. By the 1500s, the rulers of Moscow made a bold move. They started calling their expanding territory Rossía, a Greek-influenced version of Rus. This wasn't just a name change. It was a powerful political statement. They were declaring themselves the one true successor to the glory of ancient Rus. It wasn't about historical accuracy, it was about consolidating power and projecting an image of a new, mighty empire. And that's how a name helps shape a nation. See, for centuries, the people living there called their land Rus, or later Rossía. This name comes from the Rus people, the early East Slavs who founded the state of Kievan Rus. So where did Russia come from? The trail leads back to Western Europe. As contact and trade grew, Western Europeans needed a name they could easily pronounce and write in their own languages, like Latin. Rossía got simplified, adapted, and eventually morphed into Russia. Through maps, books, and diplomacy, this westernized version spread across the globe and became the internationally recognized name. It's a great example of how language and history are constantly shaping each other.